My name is Kathy R. Morin, and I am 33 years old. I was 3 days away from hosting what I thought would be the most extravagant thing I'd ever done for family: my brother's baby shower. $11,000 already spent, and that number was actually conservative because it didn't include the little things that add up when you're chasing perfection: extra ribbon, rush fees, last-minute shipping costs, those small "it's only $50" decisions that become $1,000 by the end of a week. I wasn't just paying money, I was paying attention. I was paying time. I was paying the kind of emotional labor that makes you rearrange your entire life so someone else can feel celebrated. The venue had been booked and paid for months ago, a bright modern space with soft natural light that photographed beautifully, because my sister-in-law cared about aesthetics, and I didn't want her to feel like she had to settle for a backyard folding chair moment. The decor was picked down to the smallest detail: hand-painted table signs, a balloon arch that matched the nursery theme, florals that mirrored the exact shade she'd used in the baby's mood board. I had a private chef lined up for a 5-course menu we'd planned together over a Zoom call, and I'd hired a photographer whose work she'd admired for years, the kind of professional she would never have paid for herself but always wanted. And it wasn't even the first time I'd done something like this. My brother and his wife had been struggling financially for years. They weren't bad people, not in a simple cartoon villain way, but they were the kind of people who lived one emergency away from collapse because they never planned for the next month, let alone the next year. Over time, I became the safety net. Rent, I covered it. Car repairs, I handled those. Unexpected bills, always me. There were years where I didn't even flinch anymore when my phone buzzed with a "Can we talk" text, because I already knew what was coming. I told myself this baby shower was my gift, my way of making them feel celebrated without the weight of money hanging over the day. For weeks, I had been chasing RSVPs, staying up late coordinating vendors, adjusting my own work schedule so I could take calls during business hours. I was tired, but I was also proud. I thought I was doing something good. I thought family would feel like family. Then the message came. It was from my sister-in-law, and it was so short it felt like a slap that didn't bother to wind up first. "It's really just close family. Don't make it awkward by showing up." I reread it 3 times, waiting for my brain to find the missing context that would make it make sense. Maybe she meant don't bring extra friends. Maybe she meant don't invite coworkers. Maybe she meant the guest list had gotten too big. But it didn't say any of that. It said don't show up, as if I was some distant acquaintance who'd inserted herself where she didn't belong, as if I wasn't the reason the entire event existed. I was literally close family. I was my brother's only sibling. Before I could even decide how to respond, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. "It's her moment. Be mature." That one hit harder. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until I exhaled and felt my chest tighten. I had expected my mom to defend me, to say something like, "Of course you'll be there. You're the one making this happen." Instead, she was telling me to step aside like I was an inconvenience, like my presence would ruin the atmosphere they wanted to curate. Something shifted in my mind right then. I didn't feel rage first. I felt clarity. Cold, quiet, and immediate. If I wasn't welcome, my money wasn't welcome either. I wasn't going to bankroll a party I wasn't allowed to attend like some invisible sponsor whose only job was to pay and disappear. So I acted. I called the venue first and explained there was a change in plans. Payment reversed. Then I emailed the chef and canceled the booking, accepting whatever deposit I'd lose. I contacted the decorator and told her to stop all work immediately. I logged into the event account I had created specifically to cover surprise expenses and froze it so nothing else could be charged. In under 2 hours, every moving piece of that baby shower had been dismantled. The whole thing collapsed so quickly it almost felt unreal, like watching a beautiful set get struck after the show closes. The following morning, I woke up to 19 missed calls, half from my mom, half from my brother, and the rest from numbers I didn't recognize. Then there was one message sitting at the top of my notifications that made my skin prickle. "Call me now. We need to talk before you ruin everything." It was signed with my sister-in-law's father's name. That's when I realized this wasn't going to be a simple family disagreement. They weren't going to ask why I was hurt. They were going to demand I fix the problem I'd created by refusing to be used. And they were going to come at me like I was a rebellious employee, not a person who had just been uninvited from the event she paid for. I let the phone ring again and again while my coffee machine sputtered on the counter. Then, after nearly an hour, I answered the call from her father. He didn't greet me. He didn't ask how I was. His first words were about disappointment, about how hard pregnancy had been on his daughter, about how cruel it was to ruin the happiest day of her life. He spoke fast, like if he kept talking I wouldn't have room to object. Then he dropped the line that turned my stomach cold. "You're the only one in this family who earns well. It's your responsibility to help." He said it like it was fact, like my income was communal property, like I owed them. In that moment, I understood exactly what kind of war this was going to be. I hung up on him without saying more than I needed to. I didn't owe him a debate. His sentence had already said everything. "You're the only one who earns well. It's your responsibility. Not thank you. Not you've been generous. Responsibility." Like I was a household appliance that existed to keep their life running. For a few minutes, I just stood in my kitchen staring at the wall while my coffee went cold, letting that word settle. Responsibility. The way they used it made it feel like a chain. The calls started again immediately, as if someone had hit a button the second the line went dead. My brother first, back to back, 6 times in a row. I let them ring. Then my mother, and unlike my brother, she didn't start with questions. She started with accusations. She said I was being immature. She said I was making everything harder than it needed to be. She said family comes before money. I told her this wasn't about money. It was about respect. She ignored that and pivoted right back to the baby and the guest list and how I was ruining a moment that wasn't even mine. That made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. I wasn't allowed to have moments. I was only allowed to fund theirs. By early afternoon, my sister-in-law finally messaged me directly. The tone was different than her first text, softer at first, like she was trying on sincerity. She said she hadn't meant it the way it sounded. She said she just wanted the guest list intimate. Then she added quickly that the baby shower was for women and close female family, and she didn't want anything awkward. It was a flimsy excuse, and it didn't even fit the facts. My mother and her mother were invited. Her friends were invited. A photographer was invited. Apparently, I was the only person whose presence could make it awkward, which told me exactly where I stood in her story. Not family. A tool. Then she pivoted, faster than I expected, right back to what she actually wanted. She asked me to release the payments again. She said it would be devastating if everything fell apart now. She said she was stressed. She said it was for the baby. The unborn baby, the baby who was somehow already being used as leverage. I didn't reply. At 4 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, my brother was standing there with that look he gets when he's trying to balance desperation with righteousness. He didn't look angry at first. He looked like someone who believed he could still talk me back into the role I'd always played. But it didn't last. He stepped inside without waiting to be invited, looked around like he had the right, and started talking about how I was overreacting, how his wife's message was a misunderstanding, how pregnancy hormones were making everything feel bigger than it was. He told me the event was still happening, but now everyone was scrambling because I pulled the money. He said I was making his wife look bad in front of her friends and family. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue with the details. I told him one sentence, the same one I'd already told her father-in-law. If I wasn't family enough to be invited, I wasn't family enough to pay. He stared at me for a long second like he couldn't compute it. Then he asked the question that almost made me laugh. "You're not going to take the car over this, right?" The car, the one I bought for them last year when theirs died. The one that was still in my name because they couldn't qualify for financing. The one I insured, registered, and maintained so they could keep their jobs and their life moving without consequence. In that moment, something clicked so cleanly it felt like a door shutting. He wasn't asking because he didn't want to lose transportation. He was asking because he believed the car was part of the package, part of what I owed. I didn't answer him in that moment. I didn't have to. The answer was already forming. After he left, I sat down at my desk with a notebook and my laptop and did something I should have done years ago. I looked at every single expense I had been covering for him and his wife. Seeing it all in one place was embarrassing. Not because I'd helped, but because I'd let it become normal. The car payment, the insurance, the internet bill I'd taken over temporarily almost a year ago, half their electric bill paid directly from my account, small grocery transfers that had become monthly, And the baby savings account I'd been quietly funding for nearly a year, $400 a month set aside just in case, because I knew they never had a just in case. The list looked like a second household, like I had been paying for a life I didn't live. The car was the first cord I cut. I called the insurance company and removed their names from the policy, scheduling the coverage to end in 3 days. Then I sent my brother a text with one line. I'm picking up the car on Friday. No explanation, no negotiation, just the time. Next were the utilities. Both accounts were in my name. It took less than 5 minutes to cancel them. Then I closed the baby savings account and transferred every cent back into my own account. By noon, I had erased over $1,000 a month in support they had been leaning on without ever acknowledging. The phone started ringing again almost immediately, as if they could feel the support disappearing in real time. My brother called, my mother called, my sister-in-law texted, and when I still didn't respond, her father showed up at my door by early evening. He stood there holding a single sheet of paper like he was about to serve me legal notice. He handed it to me without a greeting. It was a list, written out neatly, of everything I had committed to over the past year. The car, the shower, the monthly payments, even nursery furniture I'd agreed to help buy. At the bottom, he'd written a total in bold numbers. Then he said, I'm not asking you to do everything, but you should at least settle what you owe so they're not left struggling right before the baby comes. It took me a full second to process the absurdity. He was acting like I'd signed a contract, like my generosity was legally binding, like my money was their entitlement. I laughed, not politely, but the kind of laugh you give when something is so insane you can't pretend it deserves respect. Then I closed the door in his face. 5 minutes later, the vibration of my phone started again. Group messages, guilt trips, manipulation in different outfits. And sitting there in the silence after, I realized I had crossed a line there was no coming back from. This wasn't a fight about a baby shower. This was a declaration. I was no longer their safety net. And judging by the panic and anger, they never imagined the day would come. 2 mornings after I shut off the utilities and closed the baby savings account, I decided it was time to deal with the car. I didn't text, didn't call, didn't announce anything. I just drove straight to my brother's house. My plan was simple: get the keys, drive away, and end that chapter cleanly. I told myself it didn't need to be dramatic. I'd already made my point. When I pulled into the driveway, my stomach dropped. The car wasn't there. His wife's old hatchback sat crooked near the curb, one tire slightly flat, but the newer car I'd bought, the one still legally mine, was gone. The blinds were half closed, and through the front window I could see the faint shadow of someone moving inside. They were home. They were just pretending they weren't. I knocked once. No answer. Knocked again, louder. Still nothing. That was the moment I understood they weren't just upset. They were hiding my property like it was already theirs, like I wouldn't actually do anything about it, like I was still the same person who would sigh, give in, and let it slide. I sat back in my own car, pulled out my phone, and called the tow company. I gave them the make, model, and plate number. Since the car was in my name, there were no questions. The woman on the line told me they'd locate it within 48 hours. They didn't need that long. 3 hours later, my phone rang. It was my brother, and this time there was no attempt at calm. His voice was tight with rage and panic. The tow truck had shown up at his workplace, right in the middle of his shift, and hauled the car away from the employee parking lot. According to him, his coworkers had gathered at the windows to watch it happen. Everyone knew. Everyone saw. You embarrassed me, he snapped. Do you have any idea how that makes me look? I told him he should be more concerned about the fact that he thought he could keep a car that wasn't his. Then I hung up before he could respond. For the first time, I didn't feel shaky after standing my ground. I felt steady. I thought that would be the end of it for the day. I was wrong. That evening, my phone rang again, this time from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. When I heard the voice on the other end, I actually froze. It was my father. My father, who had been emotionally absent for years. The man who never called on birthdays, never checked in, never showed up for anything, unless my mother orchestrated it. Suddenly, he was on the phone saying my mother had asked him to talk some sense into me. He didn't ask how I was. He went straight into the speech about family, about how when one person does well, it's their duty to lift everyone else up. I'd heard versions of this before, but then he dropped a line that made my blood run cold. They told me you promised to buy them a house next year. You're not backing out of that too, are you? I laughed, but it wasn't funny. It was disbelief. I had never promised them a house, not once. I hadn't even hinted at something that big. And yet, in their version of reality, my generosity had already been extended into the future, into commitments I never made. That was when it hit me. They weren't just reacting to what I'd already given. They had been planning around what they assumed I would give next. I wasn't a safety net. I was a long-term strategy. The next morning, I made another call. The nursery furniture I'd put on hold under my name was scheduled for delivery in a week. Crib, dresser, rocking chair, everything. I canceled the order and had the deposit refunded. They could figure it out themselves. A few hours later, there was another knock at my door. This time it was my brother. He looked smaller somehow, like the bravado had finally drained out of him. No yelling, no posturing, just straight up begging. He wasn't asking about the shower or the furniture anymore. He wanted me to at least keep paying the insurance on his wife's old hatchback because they couldn't afford a policy right now. I stood there listening, and for a moment I almost said yes. Almost. That word again. Almost. That's how it had always gone. Almost saying no. Almost drawing a line. Almost protecting myself. And every almost had brought me right back to this place. I told him no. When he kept talking, I closed the door. That was the first time in years I had shut him out completely. No explanation, no apology, just done. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was actually in control of my own life. After I told my brother no and closed the door, the silence lasted less than 24 hours. By the next morning, my phone lit up with a group message that included my mom, my brother, and me. My mom started it with, "Alex, enough is enough. You're hurting the whole family. Put the past week behind us and move forward." That phrase again, move forward, like nothing had happened, like the exclusion, the entitlement, the lists of what I supposedly owed them were all minor inconveniences we could smooth over if I just agreed to keep paying. My brother followed up immediately, saying he was sorry for how things went down with the baby shower, but asking me not to punish them by taking away things they needed to survive. That word stuck in my throat. Survive from what? They still had jobs. They still had a place to live. They weren't starving. They were just experiencing life without a financial buffer for the first time in years. This wasn't survival. This was discomfort. By early afternoon, my mom called. She didn't ask how I was. She told me I had made my point and now needed to show grace by reinstating some of the support. She said I'd taken things too far by cutting off the car, the bills, the furniture, everything. I asked her one simple question. Did she think it was okay that I was uninvited from a baby shower I was paying for? She didn't answer directly. She said it wasn't worth ending a relationship over and that families forgive. But in my mind, the relationship had been ending for a long time. I'd just finally stopped pretending it wasn't. 2 days later, I went to the tow lot and collected my car. When I drove it home and parked it in my driveway, it felt symbolic in a way I hadn't expected. Something that was mine was finally mine again. That night, my brother called, his voice quieter, almost hollow. He said he'd do anything if I'd just give the car back or help with a few essentials. Phone bill, gas money, grocery gift cards. It sounded like someone bargaining down a sentence, trying to see what they could get away with keeping. I didn't say yes to any of it. That weekend, my parents invited me over for dinner. Against my better judgment, I went. Part of me hoped they'd finally listen. Instead, I walked into an ambush. My brother was there. My sister-in-law was there. Even her father was there, sitting at the table like he belonged. The conversation started polite enough, but it didn't take long to turn. My mom talked about how she raised me. My dad talked about family values. My brother talked about responsibility. Her father talked about what kind of example I was setting for the baby. I realized then they weren't actually interested in fixing the relationship. They were interested in fixing their access to my resources. Nothing had changed except the strategy. So I stood up, told them they'd have to figure life out without me, and walked out. No speech, no dramatic exit, just finished. That night, I blocked my brother's number. The weeks that followed were loud at first. Constant calls from numbers I didn't recognize, voicemails that started soft and ended in guilt. Letters slipped into my mailbox with urgent scribbled across the front. I didn't open any of them. They went straight into a drawer. If I ever doubted myself, I knew I could open one and remind myself why I'd done this. Eventually, the noise died down, and when it did, the silence felt strange but steady. Through cousins and distant family, I started hearing updates. Without my help, my brother and his wife had to make real changes. They sold things they couldn't afford. He picked up a second job. She started freelance work. They moved into a smaller apartment, and for the first time, they were actually paying their own bills. I wasn't there for this birth. I wasn't there for the first milestones. But one day, a cousin sent me a photo of my brother holding his baby, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. No forced grin, no tension. He looked lighter. It hit me then that cutting him off hadn't destroyed him. It had forced him to stand up. My parents still believe I was wrong. They say family doesn't turn their back when things get messy. I don't argue anymore. Arguing implies there's something to win. There isn't. The rare times I see my brother now, at holidays or random gatherings, it's civil. We talk about surface things. There's no yelling, no apologies, just distance. And the truth is, I still care about him. Cutting him off didn't erase that. It just stopped me from sacrificing myself for him. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that love without boundaries isn't kindness. It's enabling. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is step back and let them learn how to stand on their own. About 2 months after the baby was born, I finally settled into the quiet. No constant buzzing from my phone, no last-minute emergencies, no guilt disguised as concern. I slept through the night. I took a weekend trip for the first time in years without checking my bank balance or wondering who might need help while I was gone. I thought the worst of it was over. Then, on a random weekday afternoon, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, my stomach tightened. It was my sister-in-law. She wasn't holding the baby. She wasn't smiling. She looked tired in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. She asked if she could come in. I hesitated, then stepped aside, more out of curiosity than kindness. We sat at my kitchen table, and she didn't waste time on small talk. She said things had been hard since the baby came. Money was still tight even with my brother's second job and her freelance work. They'd been fighting more than they ever had. She admitted, quietly, that uninviting me from the baby shower was wrong. She said it was emotional, selfish, and something she regretted now. She even said my brother agreed. Then came the part I wasn't expecting. She said she didn't want money. She didn't want the car. She didn't want the furniture. She wanted me to move in with them temporarily. Just a few months. She said if I helped with the baby, she could take on more work. My brother could focus on his job. They could finally get ahead. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. After everything, after the exclusion, the entitlement, the list her father handed me of what I supposedly owed, after they treated my presence like a problem and my money like a guarantee. Now they wanted my time, my energy, my space. They wanted me back in the role, just repackaged. I told her no, calmly, clearly. She tried again, softer this time. She said it wouldn't be like before. They wouldn't expect money, just help, just family. She used the baby, saying I was her aunt, and this was my chance to build a relationship. That line almost worked. Almost. But I recognized it now for what it was. A new angle, not real change. I walked her to the door and told her I hoped things worked out for them, but I wasn't stepping back into that role. She left without arguing, but I could tell she was angry. 2 days later, my mom called. Of course she did. My sister-in-law had already told her everything, framed carefully to make me sound cold and unreasonable. According to them, I'd refused to help even in a non-financial way. My mom tried to guilt me, saying family shows up when things are hard. I told her I had shown up for years. I just wasn't doing it anymore. Then I ended the call. That night, sitting alone in my living room, I realized something that hit harder than all the yelling and accusations. They hadn't actually changed. They'd just switched tactics. And the only reason it wasn't working anymore was because I finally knew how to say no without apologizing. Time passed. The drama faded into background noise. I rebuilt my routines, my finances, my sense of self. I stopped feeling responsible for everyone else's comfort. And slowly, without my constant rescue, my family adjusted. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but they adjusted. Months later, I ran into my brother at a family gathering. We talked politely. He thanked me, awkwardly, for everything back then. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. I nodded and let it be enough. Some relationships don't get repaired, they just get redefined. Looking back, I don't regret pulling the plug on that baby shower or anything that came after. It wasn't revenge, it was clarity. I learned that generosity without boundaries turns into obligation, that being the mature one often just means being the most convenient to use, and that peace sometimes comes at the cost of disappointing people who were comfortable benefiting from your silence. I didn't lose my family, I lost the role they assigned me, and in return, I gained something far more valuable: my independence, my peace, and the knowledge that I can love people without letting them drain me dry.